So the next thing I want to talk about is what configuration files do we need to edit to get an Asterisk system up and running. If you were to install Asterisk on a box, and we've got a box here that we'll play around with here today, you'd find that there are probably 25 or 30 different configuration files, because each of these modules often have their own configuration file, and there's lots of different modules. So really there's 5 files that I find that are the most important ones that you want to start worrying about, especially as you're just learning Asterisk. So we're going to talk about asterisk.conf, which is kind of the master configuration file. We're going to look at 3 of the configuration files for the different channel drivers. We're going to talk about sip.conf. We're going to configure some phones to use the SIP protocol. We're going to talk about eeks.conf. Eeks is the inter-asterisk exchange protocol. It's a voice over IP protocol for Asterisk boxes to talk to other Asterisk boxes. So we'll talk about its configuration a little bit and its channel driver. The third channel driver we want to look at is the DAHDI channel driver. So chan.dahdi.conf is the configuration file for analog phones, analog phone lines, T1s, E1s, those sorts of things. And then last but not least, we want to look at extensions.conf. Extensions.conf is our dial plan. This is where we add the logic to the system. This is where we have the most fun in Asterisk. Okay? So let's start off looking at just kind of the basics of these files. And then we'll come back and get into some more real-world examples. So like I said, asterisk.conf is kind of the master configuration file. It tells Asterisk where to find its other modules, where to find its configuration files, how to start up. And the default settings that come in asterisk.conf for 99% of the time are satisfactory. You don't need to go messing with asterisk.conf very often. The stock settings really do work in most circumstances. Now, if you want to put your files in different directories and change your file system layout, this is where you want to go tell it, hey, I want my voicemail stored in this directory, and this is where the module files are, and this is where the configuration files are. That's where it finds all that type of information. Okay. One thing that I do like to point out to people, anybody who's used Asterisk here, you notice that on the Linux terminal it often goes to a black background with white text, and then you'll see like purple and blue text scattered in there. If you don't like that, there is an option that you can go into asterisk.conf in the optional section there in asterisk.conf that says no color equals yes. Uncomment that setting, restart Asterisk, and then you'll just get your normal black text on a white background in your Linux terminal. Some people find that a little easier to read. The next configuration file we want to talk about is the channel driver for the SIP protocol. So the SIP protocol driver here has a general section at the top of the file, and that's going to just set your kind of basic settings for the SIP protocol within Asterisk. What network port does Asterisk listen on for SIP messages? What does it identify itself as in SIP messages? Those sorts of things. Further down in the configuration file, we're going to list out any SIP devices that we're going to have connected. Say we have a SIP phone here, we want to connect it to Asterisk. Or if we want to have let's say we have a SIP trunk or a SIP service provider that we want to connect to, we would list that in sip.conf as well. And we'll get into like I said, we'll get into the details of those configuration files. But I want you to have an idea of what sip.conf is, first of all. Okay? Just like sip.conf, we can do the same thing for eeks.conf for the inter-asterisk exchange protocol. Again, the general section is going to be kind of your general settings, network addresses and ports to listen on, those sorts of things. And then we're going to list out eeks devices or eeks service providers that we want to connect to. Okay. The third channel driver I talked about was DAHDI. Again, this is for configuring of analog and analog lines, analog devices, and in trunks like T1s and E1s. DAHDI is a little more complicated, and there's really 2 pieces to DAHDI. There's a set of kernel drivers, system drivers for the hardware cards, and then there's Asterisk talking to that driver. So it's kind of a 2-step process. And so that's why I put at the bottom of the slide here, it works in conjunction with the DAHDI kernel drivers. So the DAHDI kernel driver has a configuration file, that etc system.conf, where you configure, I have this card in my machine, and it's got this many ports, and these are analog ports, those sorts of things. And then the DAHDI channel driver uses the etc chan_dahdi.conf file to talk to that driver.
Sure. If you're using just soft phones like PC to PC,
You wouldn't need to worry about DAHDI as well. This is, again, only for analog and T1 type connections, your PSTN type connections. If you're doing straight voice over IP with soft phones or IP phones, you don't have to worry about chandadi.conf as well.
So I'm getting the idea that there's no centralized topology management in Asterisk.
There's not. It's very free form. Any structure that's there is structure that you add on top of it.
Distributed amongst all these different conf files.
Correct. Yep, and it's really up to you as the Asterisk administrator to make sense of it all and make sure that you keep things organized in a way that works for you, because what makes sense for you may not fit somebody else's mantra, especially as flexible as Asterisk is. But yeah, there's no centralized user management or anything like that. It is just the hodgepodge collection of different configuration files, and however you put those together, that works. Okay, question here, and then we'll get back there.
Do we have any copies of these slides anywhere that we can download?
That's a good question. That's what I'm trying to get an answer to this morning.
If you can give us a page to download it from.
Sure. That's what we're trying to figure out. Several years ago, we used to give people, as they walked out the door at the end of the day, a CD with all the slides on there. Then we found people were taking those slides and teaching their own classes based on our material. So one of the things we're doing is trying to get this video. We're doing recording of the video, and we're going to try to make that publicly available. I'm hoping we can get everything lined up in a row to be able to do that. If not, you can always come to one of Digium's training classes and get the material that way. Shameless plug. You guys can pay me later. Okay. We're good. All right. Question back here in the back.
I'm going to use the analog cards, so you have the FXS and FXO signaling.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do the same type of thing with the T1 cards with a crossover table?
Yes.
And have one side simulate the public exchange?
You can. Right. So on a T1 connection or an E1 connection, there's two sides of the connection. One side is called the network, when that's the telco side, and the other end is called the CPE, or customer premise equipment side. That's the PBX side. Yes, Asterisk will emulate either side, and you can do a T1 crossover between two ports or two boxes to emulate a telco. Absolutely. That's what we do in our training classes.
I actually need to do that myself.
It comes in very, very handy, especially when you're connecting to other PBXs and doing troubleshooting and those sorts of things. So yes, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about 4 of the configuration files that we want to talk about. The last one we want to talk about is the dialplan. This is a configuration file called extensions.conf. Don't ask me why they didn't call it dialplan.conf. I don't know. It's extensions.conf. Now, the word extension gets overloaded a lot, especially when you're talking about telephone systems and PBXs. So let me take a break from the slides here for just a second to talk about what is an extension. Okay? On a traditional PBX, an extension is what? It's a phone, right? This is extension 123, right? Or it's a set of wires that goes out to a particular phone, right? In the world of Asterisk, an extension, a phone is not an extension. An extension is just a set of actions in the dial plan. Okay? That extension may say, hey, go ring out to that device, or go send the call to voicemail, or put the caller in a call queue. But an extension is not a device. They're treated separately in Asterisk. And so that's one of the major hurdles people run into as they start learning Asterisk is we use the little different terms for things. So an extension is just a set of actions in the dial plan that may or may not call out to a device through a channel driver. Okay? So in talking about extensions.conf, this is where we get to script what happens when you dial a particular extension number. You dial extension 123. Does it ring this phone? Can people from the outside call that extension, or is it just something that can be called internally? So this is where you also set security boundaries within your system. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time today teaching you the basics of extensions.conf, because this is where the real power of Asterisk is. It's in being able to script how you want your PBX to be built. Okay. So to cover what we've kind of recap what we've covered here in Module 2, we talked about the architecture of Asterisk. We've talked about how Asterisk modules work, and that you can plug these different modules together. We talked a little bit about the channel drivers, the resources, the applications. You remember that big picture that I showed. There's a command line interface that we have. There's also programmatic interfaces that we have that other programs can use to communicate with Asterisk. And then I've introduced you to the configuration files. All right. Any questions up to this point?
Are you going to talk about real-time requirements for the processing coding calls, that sort of thing?
It's really, we don't go into it in a lot of detail because everybody's situation is slightly different. But in general, because this is a PBX in software, most everything is done in CPU. All the transcoding, all the protocol conversion, signaling conversion, all that is done in the CPU. So the more CPU power you have available, the more concurrent calls you can handle. Digium sells a number of PCI and PCI Express cards that you can put in the machine to offload that transcoding in certain cases to dedicated silicon, a DSP in a card, to offload that from the CPU. That's available for certain codecs and certain configurations. That isn't available for all codecs yet. So, but those sorts of things can certainly help as far as.
So, but in general, you do not need a real-time version of Linux.
Nope. Just your ordinary version. Go download. Fedora, or Red Hat, or CentOS, or Debian, or Ubuntu, or again, whichever flavor of Linux or Unix you're most comfortable with, and it'll work just fine.
Does Asterisk provide functionality for handover backups? Like you have multiple systems and one fails, so the others will take over?
Not in and of itself, it doesn't. And things like backups, it's really up to you to do from an operating system level, not within Asterisk. That's one of the things we've always struggled with is how to scale Asterisk beyond just a single machine. What's typically done is that a lot of people will say put failover boxes in the case of T1s and that sort of thing, or like SIP proxies in the case of a SIP connection in front of multiple systems, and use that for load balancing or failover purposes. I wish there was a cleaner, easier way to do kind of system failover from one box to another. And that's one of the things I'm hoping that we can tackle in the next few years within Asterisk is start to attack some of those. How do we get to 5 nines or 6 nines of uptime when we're using commodity PC hardware and that software running on a commodity operating system? So those certainly things we're interested in, but we haven't completely solved yet.
I would recommend dual RAID 5.0.
Right. Anywhere you can.
Yeah, no, go down a few layers.
Mm-hmm. Right. Anything that you can do like.
Layer 7.
Yep. Anything you can do with like redundant power supplies, RAID arrays, those sorts of things. If you can have dual home networks coming off of 2 switches, that anything to eliminate those single points of failure, that's good. Now the other side of that is the more that you add things like dual power supplies and RAID arrays and multi-home switches and those sorts of things, you're creating less single points of failure, but you're creating a lot more other points of failure. And so that's always this kind of whack-a-mole problem of what it comes down to risk analysis and what are my risks and how do I mitigate those particular risks? Not how do I keep anything in the system from ever going wrong, because things go wrong. We all know that, but it is a matter of risk mitigation and figuring out what are my pain points. If I'm running a call center, my biggest risk is that I've got 1,000 people out there in the call center that aren't doing anything and I still have to pay them. And so how do I mitigate that risk? If I'm doing, say, a hosted voicemail service, I've got a completely different set of risks. So it really comes down to risk mitigation in that standpoint. Question over here.
On the modules, you said Asterisk loads multi-default, whatever you can find. Are there performance benefits of not loading modules you don't need?
Sure. They don't take up any memory, and they can't take up any CPU if they're not loaded. There's a configuration file called modules.conf where you can set which modules to load and not load. Go look at that sample file, and it's pretty obvious how to keep modules from loading it. Question in the back here.
Are there any differences in the capability between an AGI scripted dialplan versus the Perl-like standard extension.conf?
Yes. So to kind of set the framework for this question for people who don't understand, in addition to our own internal scripting language in the dialplan, we have the capability to call out to external programs, say written in Perl or PHP or Python or Ruby, whatever your favorite scripting language is. And that's what we call AGI, or the Asterisk Gateway Interface. There's trade-offs there. Obviously, if you're writing your dialplan, say in Perl or Python,